When we think of Celtic culture and countries, several images come quickly to mind. Perhaps it's the four-leaf clover or the Celtic cross. Well, then of course there's traditional Celtic music and dance. The Scottish football team and Boston basketball team are other famous examples. But what are the Celtic countries exactly? What makes them so Celtic? And what if these countries united? While they already share language and historical similarities, an official economic and political union might be a very interesting proposition. But first of all, let's clear up a confusing question. Do we say Celtic or Celtic? The common belief is that we use a hard C, as you probably have noticed throughout this video, making it Celtic. The only exception to this pronunciation seems to be when referring to sporting teams like the NBA's Boston Celtics or the Scottish football team Celtic. So, who and where are the Celtic countries? It's generally agreed upon that there are 6 modern-day Celtic regions or countries. They are Ireland, Wales, Scotland, the Isle of Man, Cornwall, and Brittany. All lie in northwestern Europe, with most being in the British Isles. Brittany is a French peninsula that stretches into the Atlantic Ocean from the northwest of France. Even though Brittany and Cornwall aren't technically countries, all 6 are known as Celtic nations. They're bound together because they share not only similar histories but also closely related languages. Whilst each nation has its own language, they all come from the same Indo-European language family, which was spoken by the ancient Celts. The first trace we have of the Celtic people dates back to around 1300 BCE. The Celts were mainly based around Central and Western Europe. However, at various stages, they settled across a larger area of Europe. They moved as far south as Portugal and all the way east to Turkey. In fact, the Celts were by far the biggest group of people in European history. Although they were never part of an official empire, their various groups and tribes were bounded by a number of common factors. They were polytheistic and they shared similar religious beliefs. Gods representing natural forces were worshipped, and rituals and animal sacrifices were very common. They also had the same artistic expression, with abstract designs and stylized animals being key features of their art. Most relevant to today's Celtic countries is how the ancient Celts shared language. Although little was actually written down, Celtic leaders and druids shared information and anecdotes verbally, resulting in the language being preserved for centuries. Exact details of Celtic life and beliefs can be hard to decipher, as they left few written records. Much of this is to do with the Celtic druids being reluctant to record any details for fear of giving away prized secrets. Throughout much of their history, the Celts feuded with other empires, most notably the Romans. They were known as formidable warriors, and most definitely held their own in battle. Arguably the most famous victory was the Battle of the Sacking of Rome in 390 BCE, when the city was reduced to ruins, and Roman senators put to the sword. After witnessing the Celts in action, Julius Caesar was forced to reluctantly admit that they were a fierce and worthy opponent, even if they were seriously barbaric. In around 200 BCE, the Celts crossed the sea to the British Isles, and they settled in. At the same time, Roman and Germanic Hun forces were gradually squeezing the Celts out of Europe. The Celts were pushed out of Spain and the far west of France. In 43 CE, Rome launched an invasion of Britain under the command of Emperor Claudius. The Romans took over most of southern Britain, including England and Wales. The Celtic tribes were forced to retreat north to Scotland. Others settled in Ireland, which the Romans never bothered to conquer. The Romans stayed in Britain for the next few centuries, until 410 CE, when they were forced to leave. Rome was under heavy attack, and the empire was in danger of collapsing. This prompted the mass withdrawal of Romans from Britain. So, the scene was set for the Celtic people to remain in Ireland and several other parts of Britain. Today, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the Isle of Man, Cornwall, and Brittany represent the ancient race of Celts that were once united throughout Europe. So, what if these Celtic nations were to unite? Would it work, and what would they gain? Well, let's crunch some numbers, people. That was super nerdy and cringy, but we're moving right on. The combined population of united Celts would come to around 18 million people. Certainly small by global standards, but bigger than many European countries, comparable to the Netherlands. Added to this, it would be a well-educated and skilled population, which would be a major factor in the Celtic Union succeeding. This brings us to the economic output of the Celtic nations. With Ireland, Scotland, and Wales leading the way, the potential GDP could be up around $1 trillion. That's greater than Switzerland and on par with Brazil and Saudi Arabia. Ireland in particular does a lot of the heavy lifting for a Celtic Union GDP. It's estimated that GDP is around $650 billion, which is more than triple that of Scotland or Wales. Much of this is due to heavy investment in Ireland by major corporations over the past 20 years. These include Apple, Google, United Airlines, and a host of pharmaceutical and financial companies. So far, so good. The diversity in economic strengths is another advantage for a Celtic Union. For example, Ireland's economy is largely based on services, especially banking and IT. Scotland has become a European leader in the production of chemicals, pharmaceuticals, as well as its primary resources of oil and gas. Wales is renowned for its agricultural output and has recently added financial services and electronics and renewable energy to its CV. The other Celtic nations also pull their weight. The Isle of Man's main industries are aviation, tourism, and finance. Cornwall and Brittany's economic contributions would be largely based on agriculture and fishing and tourism. All in all, an impressively diversified economic union. If the Celtic nations united, business and trade transactions would be much simpler if they used the same currency. Ireland is still very much a part of the EU, which would mean the euro is a good option. However, when the UK left the EU in 2020, Scotland and Wales were forced to exit. This may only be temporary, however, as both countries have expressed regret at Brexit, as shown an eagerness to re-enter the EU. Other options might include using a common currency, such as the British pound or even the US dollar, although the euro would appear to be the most convenient. Economics and politics aside, there may also be strong cultural and historical motivations for a Celtic nation union. The most obvious connection is the language. The Celtic languages most used today can be basically broken down into one for each Celtic nation: Irish for Ireland, Scottish Gaelic for Scotland, Welsh for Wales, Breton for Brittany, Cornish for Cornwall, and Manx for the Isle of Man. Oh, I guess Mon? Each of these languages falls into the broader Proto-Celtic, which derived from Central Europe long, long ago. This language was prominent prevalently amongst Celtic people in the Bronze Age, dating back to at least 1200 BCE, in the region that is now Germany and Austria. For variations of this truly ancient language to still be in use today is remarkable. There is a strong cultural and historical link between the Celtic nations that should be a source of pride and connection. And then there's the history of their Celtic ancestors. Not only were the Celts the largest group of people in Europe, but they lived rich and colorful lives that are still embraced today. Yes, they were fearsome in battle, but they weren't just barbarians. Far from it. The Celts were skilled metalworkers, and they taught these techniques to any group of people that they happened to run into. These skills included how to smelt and forge iron so as to make tools, weapons, and armor. Celtic tribes were also renowned for their advanced textiles, many of which can be seen in today's Scottish tartan. It's additionally widely believed that it was the Celts who first wore pants in Europe. There is furthermore the famous Celtic spirit of lust and life, which can still be seen wherever you meet people with Celtic ancestry. In the Iron Age, the Celts were drinking beer and wine that they discovered in Greece. They celebrated sacred events such as the changing of seasons or a new leader being appointed with massive feasts. These feasts and the levels of alcohol consumption stunned the Romans, who thought that they'd seen it all in decadent Rome. However, the Celts partied hardy because it was an excellent way of bonding with their allies and strangers. It was also firmly believed that the celebration would continue into the afterlife. Many of these values still remain in Celtic culture. People getting together in pubs or parties is an essential part of life, whether you're in Dublin or far western Brittany. People of the Celtic nations also are fiercely proud of their history. Celtic tattoos have always been in vogue, and sporting teams are, again, often named after their Celtic roots. A Celtic country union would not only be economically beneficial, but it would also strengthen the bond between the 6 existing Celtic nations. And it's definitely not impossible.